Hey, everybody, we are back with Miami Webfest, and we are here with a very special guest, Jendayi Omowale. Hey, Jendayi, how are you?
I'm good. I'm so happy to be here. Really excited to be a part of Miami Web Fest.
You know what? We are really excited to have you here. There's certain things that we already know about you, and I really want to talk about you first, and then we're going to talk about your series, Black Arrogance.
Amazing.
So let's talk about you a little bit. So you're a very prolific writer. Tell me how you got started in writing.
For sure. I come from like a family of writers. My mom was a journalist, and then my grandma like used to write all the time. So by the time I was like 16, I was already doing like full-time internship with like my local Caribbean news station, WinFM. And then the following year, I got into NYU on journalism. And so I studied journalism, dramatic literature, and I minored in history for the 4 years I was at NYU. And around my sophomore year, I both started to take writing a lot more seriously. So I got involved with the Interlude Magazine as a creative writing editor. And there is kind of like where I started publishing my first big pieces about like the Black Lives Matter protest of 2020. And I also pivoted to photojournalism. So I did a lot of like photo essays about like the protests and different things.
Mm.
And I also started pivoting into documentary filmmaking. And my first documentary was gentrification's effects on the Black hair industry in New York. So I've kind of always like gone hand in hand with both like the filmmaking and journalism aspects. I started writing regularly for apartment therapy, kind of like in the same social justice bubble, where I would often take like a look at the bigger picture and then I would apply it to like my personal stories in life so that, people would feel kind of invested in concepts that could feel kind of vague. And then I also started writing for them. I did a piece on how colonialism affects LGBT identity for people of color. And yeah, that's kind of how I got started.
All right, so I'm getting a vibe of someone that got really really good grades in school.
Yeah,
Is that true?
yes, that's very true. I graduated magna cum laude, and I was one of
Mm.
the top diploma recipients for NYU. I was class representative, and that was really cool for the College of Arts and Sciences. And yeah, very very good grades throughout school. Yeah,
See, I read that. See, I graduated, thank the laude, so it's a whole different kind of. But yes,
amazing.
yeah, no, this is great. So, um, I just found out today that you are also a photographer.
I right now I'm a freelance photographer for apartment therapy. So I have this really cool job where I get to go to different apartments all around New York City. I get to like talk with people and photograph, and especially in a place like New York City, I think it's very interesting to see how just, how varied people live and how people organize their spaces. And then also, as I was saying before too, I did a lot of photojournalism when I was doing my protest coverage. And that's honestly kind of like how I really got started in the photography space. I haven't done one very recently, but now and again, I'll do like creative or more artistic projects with photography, and usually in some way, shape, or form, they surround like Black femme identity and exploring it in different ways. I did a series about my friend Morena, and basically I used a lot of Caribbean mythology to sort of like create this sort of like mermaid lunar space in my work. And then I also photographed a friend Shay, and I more so explored like how Black girls influence fashion. So I really enjoy photography.
Nice. Do you feel that there isn't like how do you think it's changed over the last say decade in terms of the impact of Black women in fashion?
Ooh,
Are
that's
we getting
a
better
very
or are we
good
getting worse?
one.
I guess is my question.
I think we're getting better, and honestly, I would say this kind of for all creative fields. I feel like very recently, especially with the Black Lives Matter movement that like had a big surge in 2020, I think a lot more people are kind of looking to seek authentic Black voices, especially in the creative space, because we kind of use creativity to send very important messages about the world in a way that's more digestible to the general public than, like a politician speaking about it or a scientist doing like a research project about it. And so I think, the more people that got curious about that and police brutality and, wanting to help their fellow people, I think, likewise, then people started looking at the creative fields and being like, okay, how do the things I consume in everyday life, my bags, my hair, my clothes, the TVs, the movies I watch, the writing I read, how am I seeking out authentic Black voices and representation in those spaces? And so I think as long as that drive is there with the general public, we'll continue to see, more hopefully Black women entering those spaces.
Yeah, yeah, I really hope so because I do. I like the trend and the direction that we're going in.
For
One
sure.
of the quotes that you use that I really liked from Nina Simone: "An artist's duty, as far as I'm concerned, is to reflect the times." Would you say that that encompasses sort of your art philosophy, or if not, what is your art philosophy?
For sure. I think that perfectly emphasizes my art philosophy, where basically I'm kind of trying to remind people of the longstanding tradition Black artists have had with civil rights and social justice in terms of like throughout history. Black art isn't always political, but it has usually played a very big role in our political movements. And that's kind of actually why I created Black Arrogance, because I kept going to a lot of these George Floyd protests, Breonna Taylor protests, and I kept thinking to myself, well, what happens with my activism once I leave the protest, once I leave the picket line, put down my signs, how am I continuing the work? And so I felt that, as someone who also has a really strong interest in art history, and just art in general, that it would be really nice to sort of create a series around that where it's sort of like I give you some information about art and art history, and that's cool. And I also remind you that, especially for Black people, this usually has some very heavy significance about our experiences and can relate so much to activism. So yeah, I definitely use like Nina Simone and so many other like Black artists sayings about being a political voice and being like a strong voice for representation on important topics. I take that really serious.
Sure. So let's talk a little bit more about Black Arrogance in this series.
Sure.
So one of the things that I found notable about it is just the way that it is scripted, if you will. In other words, it's I see a lot of documentaries, and I notice that because it's a documentary, sometimes people can go in many directions, and it's not linear, and so sometimes it can be hard to follow. And
Sure.
that was not the case with Black Arrogance. So I'd like to, for those who haven't watched it yet, tell us a little bit about the background. How we now know, how it kind of got started, but what is it that you want people to get out of watching this series?
I think I want people to just sort of have like a bigger vocabulary when it comes to Black artists. So I studied art history when I was in high school, and then I kind of went into it more too when I was at NYU. And sort of like the biggest thing that I noticed in general was just like the lack of Black representation in terms of like more contemporary Black artists. I think, we always get taught about like the Harlem Renaissance or like the really big moments in history with Black art, but I was kind of like, there's obviously still Black people doing art today, and I don't feel like um, people are sort of like introduced to the more recent Black artist movements we have, or like just, the people that have continued to work in that space. So I really just want people to take away, like, Black artists are still very important in our community. I think you should kind of get to know them. And I also, in general, I just kind of want to make arts education more accessible, especially with Black art history. I think it can be hard sometimes to find information, or it's like really tedious and you have to do very long hours of research to find like good and correct information on Black art history. And so I thought, if I do this nice documentary format, like it's like a nice, easy, digestible way that people can just watch and they can learn so much about, current Black art history.
Nice. Okay, well, so let's get into it a little bit because I think that you touch on in the course of all of your body of work. You touch on issues that society really needs to address, right?
For
So
sure.
let's put you in an elevator with the president, and you've got 90 seconds, and he asks you one question. That question is, "How do we fix racism?" Go.
Ooh, oh my gosh. Okay, so I think honestly the first thing is like stop calling critical race theory. It's just history. It's just the honest of what happened. Teach more anti-racism to schools, teach anti-racism to white people. Start looking at reparations, please, all across the board. And it doesn't just have to be just giving out money to people. The student loan cancellation thing is actually a huge matter of racial equity, especially for Black women. We also need a lot of improvements in terms of like Black maternal health care, police brutality, gentrification, environmental racism. So there's like a bunch of different ways that they could actually tackle the issue of reparations. That's not just like handing people money. But I think really it would just be like a two-pronged effort of like social reparations and teaching anti-racism in school and actual American history. Yeah.
You just solved racism.
Yeah. Yeah. World peace is here.
Yes.
Oh
Are
my
you
God.
are you planning to be at Miami Webfest, or are you going to join us virtually?
I have to join virtually. So actually this fall I'm going to Cambridge to study world history for my master's, so I can't be there in
Oh,
person.
Cambridge.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
I guess I shouldn't be surprised though. Magna cum laude and everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Congratulations to you. That is fantastic.
Thank you.
I have one last question for you, and I feel like anyone who's watching this interview has to have this question. If particularly independent filmmakers, get into the game and your content is good until it's better. Actually, your content is bad until it's better, and then it's good until it's better, and as you're going through those processes, I've noticed that a lot of filmmakers just they give up, because they're in that bad to better stage, and it becomes sort of too much work to get to that actual good to better than good stage, right?
For sure.
And but I noticed that your body of work continues to grow, and you don't strike me as someone who's going to give up anytime soon. So, what would you say is the secret sauce to longevity?
Honestly, I think having peers and mentors is actually very important because especially mentors or peers work that you really admire, because something for me, like when I felt sort of like discouraged or I'm like, oh, why am I not at this quality yet? When I had people whose work I already really loved and worked to and I could talk to them, you kind of get to hear their stories of like when they were doing really bad or like when they had a bunch of flaws or they were discouraged with their work. And I think it's important to have those people around you so that you can constantly remind yourself, well, if I really like this person and I really like their work and they're telling me that they're kind of in the phase that I am now, if I keep pushing, like I'll end up like them. Like I think also like um sort of just watching a lot of mediums, like watching a lot of documentaries, watching a lot of films with a critical eye, because you'll even notice that the things that you look at as already like refined and polished and like at the top of the genre, even they have their flaws. Like we have film critics for a reason, and it's because people have different opinions on art, regardless of how beautiful or perfect you think an art piece is. There's always going to be someone out there with like an opinion if they like it or they don't like it. And so I think sort of like if you keep having those two things, sort of like reminding yourself that like the beauty of art is imperfection, is the fact that it's a work in progress. You'll be able to like make it through those parts where you want to give up. And it's also like it's realistic to have those. I think especially in the creative field, it's always sort of like this weird minefield of like, okay, how am I going to reach my goals? And so it's normal to have moments where you feel like you're going to give up, but I think as long as you keep reminding yourself like this is imperfection and that's art, like you'll be able to get through it and you'll be able to continue to do work that you're proud of.
Outstanding. So I I'm going to close with this. Everyone that is watching this really, really needs to watch Black Arrogance.
Yes.
Where can they watch it?
You can currently watch all episodes on exotv.com, and also I have a Patreon that I'm starting. And by the way, anyone who's watching this, I recently started a podcast too called Black Radicals, and it's sort of like surveying a bunch of different Black leaders in political and intellectual thought. So like also if you really like the whole Black art history thing, you might want to check that out as well. And that's on Apple Podcasts. So yeah, ExoTV, Patreon, Apple Podcasts. You'll find me.
Girl, when do you sleep? How did you have time to
I know.
sleep?
I don't really sleep that much.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much for joining us. You are a tremendously impressive artist all around, and we are grateful to showcase your work at Miami Webfest.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be a part of Miami Webfest, and I really enjoyed this interview.
All right, take care.
Take care.